Let's start with the official story, what every American child learns in school. On November 22, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was riding in an open car through Dallas when Lee Harvey Oswald, a disgruntled ex-Marine, shot him from the 6th floor of the Texas Schoolbook Depository. 3 shots, 1 shooter, case closed. The Warren Commission, led by Chief Justice Earl Warren, investigated for 10 months and concluded Oswald acted alone. No conspiracy, no other shooters. Just one angry man with a mail-order rifle who got lucky, or unlucky, depending on your perspective. This story has been the official truth for over 60 years. It's in textbooks, documentaries, and museums. There's just one problem. Almost none of it holds up under scrutiny. Welcome back to the Rabbit Hole Chronicles, where we examine the mysteries that mainstream narratives overlook. I'm your host, Percival Blackwood, and today begins our 2-part deep dive into the most analysed murder in American history, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Now, before we start, a gentle warning. If you still believe Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, that a single bullet caused 7 wounds in 2 men and emerged pristine, and that the government told us the truth about November 22nd, 1963. Well, bless your trusting heart. You're exactly the kind of citizen governments dream about. But stick with us for the podcast, because by the end of part 1, you might find yourself a little less trusting and a lot more informed. Today, in part 1, the magic bullet that defied physics, we're going to examine the physical evidence, the medical impossibilities, and the strange case of Lee Harvey Oswald. In part 2, we'll explore how the truth slowly leaked out over 6 decades and what the latest revelations tell us. So let's begin where any good investigation should, with the evidence. The bullet that broke physics. The cornerstone of the lone gunman theory is something called the single bullet theory. According to the Warren Commission, one bullet, catalogued as commission. Exhibit 399 did the following. It entered President Kennedy's back, exited his throat, made a sharp right turn in midair, struck Governor Connolly, who was sitting in front of Kennedy, passed through Connolly's chest, shattered his rib, exited below his right nipple, smashed through his wrist bone, and finally lodged in his left thigh. 7 wounds, 2 men, 1 bullet. Now if you're thinking, that seems like a lot of work for 1 bullet, you're not alone. But here's the real kicker. After this miraculous journey through approximately 15 inches of human tissue and multiple bones, the bullet was found in nearly perfect condition. I mean, it looks better than bullets I've seen that were fired into cotton. But don't just take my word for it. In 1965, the US Army conducted tests at the Edgewood Arsenal. They wanted to prove the single bullet theory could work. They fired the same type of ammunition from the same model rifle into gelatin blocks, goat carcasses, and human cadaver bones. Every single bullet came out severely deformed. Not one looked like the pristine magic bullet. Not one. Fast forward to 2023. A company called Knot Laboratory decided to use modern technology to test the theory. They created a 3D digital reconstruction of Dealey Plaza using laser scanning technology, 851 million data points from 36 different scans. This is CSI level stuff, folks. Their conclusion? For the single bullet to follow the path claimed by the Warren Commission, Governor Connolly would have needed to be sitting 6 to 10 inches closer to the centre of the car than he actually was. The geometry simply doesn't work. Quick recap. The official story requires us to believe in a bullet that defies physics, ignores anatomy, and emerges looking factory fresh after causing catastrophic damage. Army tests couldn't replicate it. Modern 3D analysis proves it impossible. Yet this is still the foundation of the lone gunman theory. The medical evidence mess. If the bullet evidence is problematic, the medical evidence is a complete disaster. And I mean that literally. Evidence was destroyed, altered, and lost in ways that would make a mob lawyer blush. Let's start with what happened at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, where Kennedy was first taken. The doctors there were experienced trauma surgeons. They saw gunshot wounds all the time, and what they saw that day was crystal clear. Dr. Malcolm Perry, who performed a tracheotomy on Kennedy, initially described the throat wound as an entrance wound, meaning a shot from the front. Multiple doctors, we're talking about trained professionals, described a massive exit wound in the back of Kennedy's head. Dr. Robert McClellan said the hole was as big as a baseball and he could see brain tissue. Now, this is a problem if you're trying to sell the idea that all shots came from behind. So what happened when Kennedy's body reached the official autopsy? Everything changed. The autopsy was performed at Bethesda Naval Hospital by Dr. James Humes, who, and this is important, had limited experience with gunshot wounds. Suddenly, the throat wound became an exit wound. The massive hole in the back of the head moved to the side. But here's where it gets truly bizarre. Dr. Humes burned his original autopsy notes. Let me repeat that. The man who performed the autopsy on a murdered president took his original notes home and burned them in his fireplace. His excuse: they had blood on them and he wanted clean copies. And then, you can't make this up, Kennedy's brain went missing. The brain that could show definitively where bullets entered and exited. Gone. Vanished from the National Archives by 1966. In the 1990s, when Congress finally investigated, they found even more problems. The woman who developed the autopsy photos testified that the pictures in the National Archives weren't the ones she processed. The official photographer said the brain photos weren't the ones he took. In 2024, Dr. David Mantik, a radiation oncologist and physicist, examined Kennedy's skull X-rays at the National Archives. Using scientific measurements, he proved the X-rays had been altered. Someone had added what he called a white patch to hide evidence of shots from the front. Let's pause and recap. Experienced doctors say exit wound in the back of the head. Official autopsy says differently. Original notes destroyed. Brain disappears. Photos don't match. X-rays scientifically proven to be altered. This isn't a conspiracy theory, folks. This is documented evidence of a cover-up. Lee Harvey Oswald, the man of mystery. Now let's talk about the alleged lone gunman. The official story paints Lee Harvey Oswald as a nobody, a bitter ex-Marine who acted alone. But when you examine his life, things get strange very quickly. In 1959, Oswald was a Marine radar operator at a top-secret base in Japan, where U-2 spy planes operated. Despite earning barely $3,000 during his entire military service, he somehow saved $1,500 and defected to the Soviet Union. But here's the interesting part. He went to Helsinki first. Why Helsinki? Because it was the only place in Europe where you could get a Soviet visa in 24 hours. But that information was classified, so how did a low-level Marine know this? When Oswald showed up at the US Embassy in Moscow to renounce his citizenship, officials said his defection speech seemed rehearsed. He dramatically offered to give the Soviets radar secrets. Yet when he decided to come home in 1962, with a Russian wife, he faced no charges and got a government loan to pay for the trip. But wait, it gets weirder. In 2022, declassified documents revealed that the CIA had opened a file on Oswald in December 1960, 3 years before Dallas. They'd been watching this nobody since his Soviet defection. In 1978, a CIA finance officer testified to Congress that Oswald had been recruited by the CIA while in Japan. This testimony was so sensitive, it's still partially classified today. Oswald's best friend in Dallas was George de Mohrenschildt, a wealthy Russian oil man who documents later proved was a CIA asset. Why would this sophisticated world traveller befriend a supposedly working-class nobody? Quick summary. Marine with top-secret clearance defects to USSR using classified travel knowledge. Returns with no consequences. CIA tracking him for years. Best friends with CIA assets. Does this sound like a lone nut to you? The multiple Oswalds problem. One of the strangest aspects of this case is that Oswald seemed to be in multiple places at once. The best documented example involves a woman named Sylvia Odio. In late September 1963, 3 men visited Odio's Dallas apartment. 2 were Latin-looking. One was introduced as Leon Oswald, an American ex-Marine. The next day, one of the men called and said this Oswald character thought Kennedy should have been shot after the Bay of Pigs failure. Here's the problem. On those exact dates, the real Oswald was on a bus travelling from New Orleans to Mexico City. He couldn't have been in Dallas. When Congress investigated in the 1970s, they found Odio completely credible. In Mexico City, it gets even stranger. The CIA recorded someone calling the Soviet embassy claiming to be Oswald, but FBI agents who knew Oswald's voice said it wasn't him. The CIA also photographed someone claiming to be Oswald, but the photo showed a heavy-set man who looked nothing like him. This was so concerning that FBI Director Hoover himself wrote a memo the day after the assassination worried about an imposter using Oswald's identity. The grassy knoll. What witnesses saw. Now let's talk about what people actually saw that day in Dealey Plaza. The Warren Commission would have you believe all shots came from behind, from that 6th floor window. But that's not what witnesses said. Out of 64 key witnesses, analysed by researchers, 33 believed shots came from the grassy knoll. That's the elevated area to the front and right of Kennedy's car. Multiple witnesses smelled gunpowder at ground level, which would be impossible if all shots came from 6 floors up. Railroad Supervisor Sam Holland had a clear view from the overpass. He saw a puff of smoke behind the wooden fence on the knoll. Jean Hill, the closest civilian witness to the car, saw a shooter and tried to pursue him. She spent the rest of her life being harassed for telling what she saw. But here's what's truly disturbing. Witnesses who contradicted the official story had a troubling tendency to die mysteriously. Lee Bowers, who saw suspicious activity behind the fence from his railroad tower, died when his car suddenly veered into a concrete bridge in 1966. Dorothy Kilgallen, a journalist who interviewed Jack Ruby and said she would break the case open, was found dead of an overdose. Her notes on the case vanished. The pattern was clear. See something that contradicts the official story, face intimidation. Refuse to change your testimony, face worse. Let's recap the witness situation. Majority heard shots from the front. Multiple people saw smoke and suspicious activity at the grassy knoll. Key witnesses died mysteriously. Others were intimidated into silence. This is not what happens when you have nothing to hide. The Zapruder film, More Than Meets the Eye. Abraham Zapruder's home movie of the assassination should have been the ultimate evidence, but even this crucial film shows signs of tampering. In the 1990s, investigators discovered something shocking. 2 different CIA teams worked on the film on consecutive nights, one on November 23rd, another on November 24th. Neither team knew about the other. One worked with an 8mm film, the other with 16mm. The CIA's top photo analyst from 1963 later testified that the head explosion he saw originally looked completely different from what we see today. He remembered a white cloud lasting several frames. Today's film shows a single-frame pink mist. Dozens of witnesses said the limousine stopped or drastically slowed down. The film shows no such thing. Either dozens of people independently hallucinated the same thing, or frames are missing. The paper trail. The cover-up began immediately. On November the 24th, just 2 days after the assassination, FBI Director Hoover wrote a memo saying they needed to convince the public that Oswald is the real assassin. Not investigate if he was, convince the public he was. The conclusion came before the investigation. FBI agent James Hosty received a note from Oswald 2 weeks before the assassination. After Oswald was killed, Hosty was ordered to destroy the note. He flushed it down the toilet. This stayed hidden for 12 years. The pattern is consistent. Destroy evidence that contradicts the official story. Classify documents that raise questions. Intimidate witnesses who saw the wrong things. And above all, maintain the lone gunman narrative at all costs. Part 1. Conclusion. The story so far. So let's recap what we've learned in Part 1. The single bullet theory requires us to believe in magic, a bullet that defies physics, makes impossible turns, and emerges pristine after destroying bones and tissue. Military tests couldn't replicate it. Modern 3D analysis proves it impossible. The medical evidence is a catastrophe. Doctors' observations were contradicted, evidence was destroyed, the president's brain vanished, photos were altered, and X-rays were scientifically proven to be faked. Lee Harvey Oswald's biography reads like a spy novel. CIA connections, impossible knowledge, mysterious friends, and the ability to be in 2 places at once. This is not the resume of a lone nut. Witnesses saw and heard shots from the front. Those who insisted on telling the truth faced intimidation or worse. The most important film of the event was in CIA hands and shows signs of alteration. And through it all, a clear pattern. Destroy evidence, classify documents, intimidate witnesses, maintain the official story. But here's the thing. Everything I've told you so far was hidden from the American public for years, sometimes decades. The truth has emerged slowly, painfully, fought every step of the way by agencies that prefer their secrets stay buried. In Part 2, we'll explore how this information finally came to light, what the latest document releases reveal, and why after 60 years, the government is still hiding thousands of pages about the murder of an American president. We'll discover how modern science keeps destroying the official narrative, why the CIA gave a medal to someone for lying to Congress, and how the FBI suddenly found 2,400 documents they somehow missed for 6 decades. The journey down this particular rabbit hole is far from over. In fact, we're just getting started. This has been Part 1 of our JFK investigation. If you're ready to see how deep this cover-up really goes, join us for Part 2. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And remember, questioning the official story isn't paranoia when the official story doesn't make sense. Until next time, this is The Rabbit Hole Chronicles, reminding you that sometimes the conspiracy theorists are just people who paid attention to the evidence. The Rabbit Hole Chronicles is an independent production committed to investigating the stories others won't tell.